Okay, good. So we're up to Simon Samachei. Interesting halacha. Hanichnas lebeis hakneses u'motzah tzibur keren Krias. What if you walk into shul and you see that tzibur is saying Krias? Says the Mechaber, Sif Aleph. Kara serugin. So a person reads Krias interrupted. Tahainu. What that means? Shehischel likros v'hifsik. He began to read Krias v'hifsik, and then for whatever reason he stopped. Bein b'shtika, bein b'dibur, whether he was silent or whether he was talking. V'chaza al gomer. Then he came back to his Krias and he continues and he finished off Krias. Afilu shahal kadei ligmar es kula. Even if he delayed enough time that he could have said the whole of Krias in that gap. Yotza. But the Eved his Yotza. Of course, that's not the ideal way to do it. But the Eved his Yotza. Even if the hefsek was not his fault, it was an onus, and therefore he wasn't able to say Krias during that break, he's still Yotza. V'yeshomrim, says the Ramah, if there was this onus and he had to break during his saying of Krias, better he should go back to the beginning, and that is our minhag, if there was this big gap. You estimate the time it takes for you to read Krias subjectively. In other words, according to how long it takes you to read it, and not how long it takes most people to read it. Okay, let's see the details. It says in the Mishnah Berurah. So there was a gap. So you're reading Krias, and then there was an interruption. Whether you were silent or bein b'dibur, says the Mishnah Berurah, Sifkat Aleph, afilu imsoch b'mezid, even if in the middle of Krias you were talking on purpose, after os isabazeh, even though it's wrong, you shouldn't have done it, afapikein ein tzorich lachzor rak l'makom sheposak. You don't need to go back, you only need to go back to the place where you stopped. Va'afilu kasheposak be'emetz bracha, even if you stopped in the middle of the brachas of Krias, you can go back to that. V'uadin kashesoch be'emetz halal, and the same halacha applies if a person spoke in the middle of Hallel, or Megillah, or in the middle of Krias HaMegillah, or Birchas HaMazon, or Isha Brocha Aruka. That means you shouldn't have done it. You shouldn't speak in the middle of these things. But one did. You don't. You can. He says you can carry on. You've been Yotze, even if there was a big gap in between. V'davke kisho omrim ba'atzmai. Davke if you are saying it yourself. But if someone else is being moitzi you, and you're talking while the other guy is being moitzi you, then for sure that's not going to help you. That's not going to work. Because it's shemer ka'ina, and it's as if you're talking when you're listening. And therefore, if you're talking about other things and you're not listening, it's not going to work. Like in school in the mornings, we, after breakfast, we've introduced a new thing since your days, that one person says an alamicha for everyone. They have breakfast, they have cereals, they have bagels, so the mazonis bagels, and one person says alamicha. But if you're being yotze from that alamicha, you can't talk at the same time, because shemer ka'ina means this is if I'm saying it. Fine. When it comes to Krias lechatchila, you should do it again. Is what the Ramah says. Really, if you did speak and had this big gap during Krias, you should go back to the beginning and say it over again. Sif cotton base. Now this is the V'yesh who says that if you do interrupt, you should go back to the beginning. Taimam, the reasoning is to bishleim imlo hoya onus. I can understand if it wasn't an onus. Shem hoya roitze hoya yochalikris. For example, I start reading a book, I start talking with someone. That if I wanted to, I could have read it. So therefore, lo have a kashtika v'afilo hadibro hefsek. But onus, maybe when it was an onus, chashiva hashihia hefsek, maybe you weren't able to read it. I know whatever the onus was. Kivan shelo haya oz yochel likros, maybe that would be an interruption. And therefore, and that would be, and therefore, oz yochel, you could have read it. Now, this is specifically if the onus is that you were not able to. For example, a person needed the bathroom in the Krias. Then it was a situation where you weren't able to do anything about it. But if it was a different type of onus, imagine a person, an intruder, breaks into the shul, That's as if I was shesek b'rotzen v'loy choshev hefsek l'dezu. Maybe that's not considered a hefsek. So what would be considered a hefsek? Dafka if you couldn't do it. So for example, you go in the middle of davening, you go out in Krias Shema, you need the bathroom in the middle. So then, since you were not able to say Krias Shema then, because you need a bathroom or something like that, so then that's considered a proper hefsek. Interestingly, if you take a look at number 3, he says, "V'chishu zman shah k'dei ligmar es kula." We estimate the time it takes for you to have said the whole thing. That's always the litmus test. How long does it take for you to have finished Shema? Say it takes you, 3 minutes to say the whole of Shema. Behutzruch l'nekevov kosav b'bei halacha l'kamon shemetzarfim rak ez zman halichos lebeis hakisei. We only take the time it takes to go to the bathroom, v'shiyos the time and the time spent in the bathroom, ach lo es hazman sheholach achar kach l'yodov. But not the time afterwards when you're washing your hands. Why do we not include that time? Shehari oz kvar lo ha'onos. Because that's not an onus. Because when you're out of the bathroom, you're no longer unable, kim sheyochel kaneach yodov, but offer. You could just minimally wash your hands on some earth or the wall or something, and then you're still able to say Krias Shema. So that doesn't count in the time it takes when you for this gap. Okay. V'dafka b'Krias Shema b'irchaseh v'chiyai gavna aval b'tfilah choyze l'rosh. But when it comes to tefillah, you go back to the beginning. Afilu ba'inus acher k'meshe yisboy lekam b'simin kuftalet ayin shom mishtabura sif cotton tes zayin. Okay, kadei ligmar. So the litmus test is, the Ramos says yesh omrim that if the gap that was an onus and you were mafsik kadei ligmar es kula, right? So you went out to the bathroom and it wasn't your fault, then. And the gap was, you were out for 5 minutes, and that's longer than normally the time you take to say Krias Shema. So then the Ramah says, Chayzel l'rosh, right? Now what does it mean, Kadei Ligmar? Hayno meirosh v'ad soif afilu omed b'soif. It means from the beginning to end, however long it takes you to say Krias Shema or whatever the thing you're in the middle of. Chayzel. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Cotton Dalet, Kol zeh le'inyan di'eved. This is all but di'eved, aval lechatchila lo yafsik l'shes Kadei Ligmar kula. You shouldn't ideally make any gaps in the middle of Shema, or all these things. Even if it's not an onus. Even just sort of just tuning out. You're just having a little, 30-second dream, or I don't know what. You shouldn't make any gaps in Krias Shema. Even if it's not Krias Shema, which is Deraisa, but it's something which is Drabonon. For example, Kagoin Birchas Krias Shema. The broch is a Drabonon. For Hallel. Now this is interesting. Or Megillah of Chagavna. Sometimes you could, you have a musical Hallel. In the base, in davening in school, that we have dancing. Every Rosh Chodesh there's dancing during Hallel, but we have very strict rules that the dancing is not endless, and that we don't dance for a long time. That Rahman always does a timeout afterwards. That we time it, that we don't. But you can't leave a gap that's going to be too long. And you could argue that the dancing is part of the Hallel.
Can you say it's part of tefillah?
Yeah, you could. That is the argument, and the boys do argue that, and therefore they want to go on longer. Anything to delay Seder, but that's the concern. That is the concern, not to make it too long. With tefillah, you should be very careful with that. This is very interesting. You're in a chazonish shul where the chazan is singing some chazonas during the brachas of Krias Shema, and it's really a very long piece. A very long piece. So he's doing one little shtickle in the brachas Krias Shema, where, let's say, a piece that lasts 5 or 6 minutes, which is longer than it would take for you to say the whole thing. And the people are sitting there silently, and therefore that could be a problem. You've got to be very careful with Birchas Kohanim, which is midiraisa. That the kahal shouldn't get too prolonged in saying various tefillahs. Because if the kahal are saying long tefillahs, then the kohanim are standing there waiting. And if they're waiting a long time, that could be a hefsek in their mitzvah. And therefore it's good, what I saw writes it in the name of the Gra, that we say the Rebbeinu Shalom twice, and then the Yiratzon, which is a bit longer. So he says better to do the Rebbeinu Shalom because because maybe the Kohanim are not singing, and they're v'rak oimdin, and they're just standing there. Mamtinin ad sheyisaimu hakahol mamros, and they're standing there doing nothing whilst the kahal saying all these tachanunim. There perhaps could be a delay in the time it normally takes the whole of Birchas Kohanim, which is a problem for the Kohen. And to respond to Kaddish Kedusha, mushta lishos afilu k'dei ligmar es kula. Okay, umashma b'sefer Shulchan Shlomo to davkim u'oimid b'sefer Birchas Emes v'yatziv. Now this is specifically if he's at the end of the brachas after Shema, dahainu etzel shir chadasha. Uchad lekaman b'sefer Siman Samach Vav. Aval im adayin lo higia l'shir chadasha tov yoysa sheyish b'seirugin be'emtz bracha kama pa'amim pachas m'k'dei ligmar. Sometimes you have small breaks between the brachas. That would be better. Okay, so we said the Ramah says that if you've got this long gap, that if you have this gap, it's the Hainu. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Sif Cotton Hay, Hainu, im hifsik bekrishma. If a person made a break in krishma, afilu im hafsik hoyarak k'dei ligmar hakrishma, even if the gap was the time it normally takes to say krishma, chayzel l'rosh krishma. So let's say it takes you 3 minutes to say krishma, 4 minutes to say krishma, and there's this gap in between, then you need to go back to the beginning of krishma. Or birchas krishma, but when it comes to the brachas of Shema, lo yachzel l'rosh habracha shepasuk b'seicha. Don't go back to the beginning of the bracha where you started from. Ele im kein shah k'dei ligmar mitchila birchas yotze'er ad Gal Yisrael. We look at birchas krishma as one long chunk, beginning from straight after Baruch Hu, from Birchas Yotzei all the way through to Gal Yisrael. Now, however that long that takes. So you only go back to the beginning if you had a break long enough to say normally the whole of Birchas Krishma from the beginning to the end. If you stopped in Birchas Krishma between the brachas, in other words, when it comes to Krishma, we're much stricter. Even if you break between the parshas, between the first and second, or the second and third, if you broke enough time where you could have said the whole of Krishma, go back to the beginning of Shema, say it again. With Birchas Krishma, if you broke in the middle of brachas, in between the sort of in the middle of a paragraph, then if the break was long enough that you could have said the whole of Birchas Krishma, which means the brachas of Yetzirah through to Gal Yisrael, then you have to go back. But if it's between the paragraphs, then you don't.
What about if you have to wait for the chazan of Shema Emes and not clearly more?
Yeah, hopefully the gap won't be that long. I do remember, just a cute anecdote, that when we were in high school, I just flashback now, they took us to Manchester Yeshiva to see yeshivas, and we were high school kids, and there was one kid who was a bit of a late, and he, suddenly it hits you when you're in high school, and you go to yeshiva, the Shema is very, very long there. And, first of all, they stop after Ovam Yisrael. It was Mariv. They stop, and there's this break. Everyone's focusing their concentration, and suddenly this guy, Shema, and it's very slow. Before they said one of the Echad, everyone sort of says it together. Suddenly this kid shout out Emes, as if like he'd said the whole thing. He'd reached the end. So it's unusual for that to happen. I mean, hopefully by the time you say Shema, and by the views wait for the Chazan, it's not going to be the time that it takes K'dei Ligmar Kula. Hopefully. Okay, Siv Kotten Vav. V'hachi nog v'chein Pascha Achronim v'wadim b'tfilah v'halel u'megillah b'rchas kahanim kun shebiyanu be'halacha lefi akura bein l'haka bein l'hachme. So lefi akura, it's all subjective. How long do we say it takes? The time it takes you to finish, normally. Now, what if it said they asked from Chaim Kanievsky, if you look at 13, let's say it normally takes you, 4 minutes to say Krishma. And you normally do it quite quickly. But right now, this morning, you're doing it with a bit more kavana. After we've learned all the halachas, we're doing our Krishma is hopefully taking a bit longer. Or the other way around. Das Hagon of Chaim Kanievsky, he says, you take it what you normally do now. Mistoma. Not what you normally do, but what's happening now. Okay, let's just finish the simon very quickly. Base Kora Krishma v'nichnas beis hakneses. You saying you've already said Krishma, and you walk into shul or motzah sibah shekar in Krishma, and you see the shul as saying Krishma. Tzorich likro simoim pasuk rishon. You should say the first pasuk with them. Shelo yera kilu eni reitzel lekabel mach shema mim chaverev. You shouldn't display that you don't chas v'shalom want to mekabel al malchus shamayim. So say the first pasuk with them. Or you're saying Ashrei, you're saying you're doing Tehillim or something or whatever in a place where you're allowed to stop. But if you're in a place where you cannot stop, you're after Baruch Shama, lo yafsik, don't stop. In other words, if you're in the middle of Ashrei, yeah, and they were ahead of you and they're saying Shema, so say, in the niggun that they're saying Shema, this which gives the impression that you're doing it as if with them. That it's all about marasayin really. You shouldn't give the impression that you're not being mekabel al malchus shamayim. But you can't be mafsik, so that's what you do. Sif Kotzen Ches says Mishabura, Kor Krias Shema, V'choshkenim lo Kor Adayin, and certainly if you haven't yet said Krias Shema, the Tzorich Likra is a Pasuk Rishon, then for sure you should say the Pasuk Rishon. Aval lo Yechav not says Bezeh HaMitzvah say the Krias Shema, but don't have in mind if you just rock up to shul and they're saying Shema that you should be Yotzi your Mitzvah Krias Shema, Kivin she'ein lo tefillin b'reisha, because you're not wearing tefillin, number one, and furthermore v'gam yeh below birchas, you haven't said birchas Krias Shema. U'chudinel b'soif simen menvav b'mishnah berurah ayin sham. V'nearly dafilim hu etz lo kodim birchas. Even if you haven't yet said birchas Torah, you should still say that first pasuk of Shema with the tzibur. Kivin she'ein oimer pasuk l'shem limud. You're not learning. It's not als limud haTorah. Rak shebazeh yizoi shleim yosem pasuk rishon. Just don't say more than the first pasuk. You're just being mekabel al malchus shamayim, and you shouldn't show that sort of detachment from the tzibur. Sif Kotten Tes shekeren Krias Shema v'uadin shar dova sha'tzibur oimrim kagoyin Tzila l'David aleinu k'mohem shekein derech eretz. This is a derech eretz thing to do. Pasuk Rishon. V'gam Baruch Shem kvod malchus le'olam v'od. Also the pasuk of Baruch Shem. V'ato v'das hagra b'be'uro tzorech likros imohem kol Krias Shema. The God says actually you say the whole lot. Omnam Pesukei de Zimra nira de'ein lahachmi yosim pasuk Rishon. If you're in Pesukei de Zimra, you shouldn't do more than the first pasuk. The lav hachi das hamachaba lahachmi Pesukei de Zimra lechad lekame. Okay, Sif Kotten Yud Aleph lo yasik ha'achreinim kasu d'berachas Baruch Shama v'yishtab Pesukei de Zimra yesh lahafsik kedei lekabel al malchus shamayim matzibur. You just say the first two Pesukim Baruch Shem Shema Baruch Shem av birchas Krias Shema. But once you've asked the Baruch Hu v'chein bebein haprokim lo yafsik klal, then don't do anything. Ele yoma oisan hatevas benigun shemosim b'yom Krias Shema. Like I said before, you just say the words that you happen to be up to in the nigun that they're saying Shema. Yeah, that's Sif Gimel. There's no Mishnah Berurah on this. Kara Krias Shema v'nichnas beis hakneses. If you already said Krias Shema and you walk into shul and motzat tzibur shekeren Krias Shema, toiv sheikrim moim kol Krias Shema v'yikabel schar k'ker b'Torah. It's nice to say it with them as as if you're like learning Torah. Avlein a chayev rak pasuk Rishon question is fine, but you're only mechuyev to say the first pasuk of Shema and Baruch Shem like we said above. Okay, say no.